On your Moodle site, you may realize that you need to add or reduce permissions for a particular group of people. You do this by creating a special role for the group, and luckily it's a straightforward task in Moodle. First, click your administration panel and go to Site Administration, Users, Permissions, Define Roles. On this page, you'll notice that all of the default roles are listed in the first column. They're hyperlinked, and clicking on them will allow you to view their permissions and settings. Let's explore that briefly now by clicking on the teacher role. I can edit this role by clicking the top button, although I don't recommend it, and I'll explain why in a moment. If I did make the mistake of editing the default teacher role, however, clicking the Reset button will return the role to the default permissions that are defined by the role archetype. We'll also talk more about archetypes in a moment. The Export button will give me the role and all its permissions and settings in an XML file, which I can then import into another Moodle site. This is used primarily for custom roles, as all Moodle sites have the same default roles. The List All Roles button will take me back to the previous page. Let's click that one now. We can also see that there's a short description of each role in the second column. The third column contains the short name of the role, which is similar and works the same way as the short name of the course. The last column gives you the ability to adjust the order in which these roles appear, and you can also edit or delete each role. It's worth noting that on this page the default roles are listed from the greatest number of permissions to the least. For this reason, I don't recommend that you reorder the default roles. In fact, if you create a new role with a few more permissions than a teacher, for example, I recommend that you move that custom role up in the list so that it's positioned directly above the teacher role. That way, it's a good visual indicator that this role contains a few more permissions than that teacher role. I also recommend that you use the description box to give a detailed explanation of the permissions and capabilities of any custom role that you create. While you might remember the nuances of a particular role now, it's conceivable that you'll forget the reason for creating that custom role and/or the capabilities and permissions that the role possesses in a year or two. Please also note the presence of 3 more tabs on this page. These 3 tabs contain matrices which give the ability for a specific role to work with other specific roles. These settings can be adjusted within each role, as you'll see in a moment, but these tabs just let you adjust multiple roles at the same time without having to access each one individually. Let's take a quick look at each tab. The Allow Role Assignments tab allows, or does not allow, a specific role to be able to assign other specific roles to a user. For example, using this matrix, a teacher could assign a user the role of non-editing teacher or student within a course, but could not assign them the role of teacher. The Allow Role Overrides tab allows, or does not allow, a specific role to be able to override specific role permissions for a user. Let's try and make this one clear. A role's permissions are defined by the site administrator. However, teachers can override those defaults if they want to create powerful learning opportunities for students. For example, by default, only teachers, non-editing teachers, and those with higher permissions can rate or grade course activities. However, teachers can override the permissions of the student role to allow specific students to grade an assignment, moderate a forum, edit a glossary, etc. In the right cases, these enhanced permissions can provide leadership opportunities and empowerment for students. But this will only affect students in that specific course or activity. The permissions of the student role remain the same in every other course in the system. To summarize, overriding permissions doesn't create a new role. It just changes permissions for a specific role in a specific context. On the Allow Role Switches tab, you can select which roles a user may switch to based on which roles they already have. I'm an administrator, so in any given context, I can change my role to view the site from the perspective of another user. Within a course, for example, a teacher can do the same thing by using the drop-down menu in the upper right corner of the screen to switch their role to that of a non-editing teacher, student, or guest. They can then see the course as that user sees it. Note, however, that this capability isn't perfect because the LMS still knows the default role of that user as a teacher. The only foolproof method of experiencing your course in a different role is to enroll a test user with only that role, for example, a student or a non-editing teacher, and then log into that course as the test user. Let's get back to adding a new role. The first step is to return to the Manage Roles tab. Before we go further, let me give you a word of caution. There are no circumstances under which I would advocate that you edit or delete any one of the default roles. That's because you're going to use these roles as the templates for creating your new custom roles. So let's begin. Click the Add a New Role button at the bottom of the page. In the drop-down menu, you will see two terms, Role and Role Archetype. An archetype is the default set of permissions for a given role and is hard-coded. That means you cannot modify an archetype unless you have access to the server files. If you accidentally modify or delete one of the default roles, you can restore it using the archetype. In general, you don't need to worry about using archetypes. Instead, to create your new custom role, use the default role that is closest to the set of permissions that you're looking for. For example, let's say that the new role you want to create uses the same permission set as that of an instructor or teacher, with a few more capabilities. In that circumstance, you would start with the teacher role as the template and then add the additional capabilities to it. You could also go in the other direction, create your new role from the default template and then subtract the unneeded permissions from it. On the other hand, if you want a custom role with just a few permissions, it's better to start with no role at all and then add the capabilities you need. You also have the option on this page to use what's called a role preset. A preset is just a role that you've exported from another Moodle site. Moodle allows you to import the role file and permissions from one site to the other, so you don't have to create it again from scratch. If you choose to use a preset, click the Continue button to finish the process, and the system will create the role for you. On the other hand, if you want to create the role from scratch and you've already selected the template role, go ahead and click Continue. On this screen, you will begin to fill in the details of the new role. The short name is very important because it's what you'll use to assign this role to a user with a CSV file. If you want to learn more about how CSV files can make your administrative tasks in Moodle easier, click the link in the description box below for that video. The custom full name is how you'll refer to this role in conversation. For simplicity's sake, I usually make these two names identical. In the custom description box, enter as much detail as possible about this role. Remember that what may seem obvious to you now may be a mystery to the Learning Management System Administrator in your position 2 years from now. Use these checkboxes to determine in what context you'll assign this role. For example, the teacher role is most often assigned at the course level. Very seldom does the teacher role get assigned at the system level because most teachers should not be able to edit or grade 100% of the courses in a site. In these next 3 boxes, you will see assignments, overrides, and switches, which we've already discussed. Click the Show Advanced button. We can see the 300+ individual permissions themselves listed on the left, and they're hyperlinked, so you can read about them in the Moodle documentation. You can enter keywords in this filter box to find specific permissions. In the Permissions column, you'll see 4 radio buttons next to each permission. Permissions at a lower context will generally override anything in a higher context. For example, a user can be a student in a course, but can be assigned as a teacher to moderate a forum within that course. At the forum level only, those teacher permissions will override all of their student permissions. The 4 main contexts, or levels, are the site level, category level, course level, and activity and resource level. Inherit is the default setting. That means that the user's permissions will be the same as whatever they are in a higher context. For example, if a user has the permissions to complete a quiz at the course level, they will inherit that same permission at the individual quiz level. However, if the permission is never defined, that is, it is set to inherit at every level, the user will not have that permission. Allow means the user has this permission where the role is assigned and at all lower levels. For example, if a user is given the role of student in a course, then they will have the same student permissions at all lower levels, such as in quizzes, forums, and other activities. Be careful with prevent. By choosing this, you are removing permission for this capability even if the users with this role were allowed that permission in a higher context. For example, a student has the permission to complete quizzes by default. However, in one specific quiz, if Prevent is selected for students, the students would be unable to complete that quiz even though they have the permission in the higher context, the course level. Prohibit is rarely used. It means that the permission is denied to a user at that specific level in the system and cannot be overridden at any lower levels. To the right of the permissions column is the risks column. Icons appear here whenever changing a permission could result in problems for someone in the system. Hovering your mouse over the icon will reveal a short description of the risk. For example, making changes to this particular permission could mean that users will have access to the private information of other users. The Moodle documentation has great examples of custom roles that are commonly used within a site, and that link is in the description box below as well. Once you've selected the permissions that apply to your new custom role, scroll to the top or bottom of the page and click the Create this role button. I strongly recommend that when you have tested the role and are happy with it, you export the role as an XML file, as we showed you earlier in the video. Keep this XML file in a safe location so that if something accidentally happens to your custom role, you can import it and restore it easily. And that's it for custom roles. Please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the future videos. And feel free to request new videos on other Moodle topics in the comments section below, and we'll get right on them. Thanks for watching.